Riley.
And welcome to the American Revolution. This is episode 4. We're going to dive into some speeches, and I believe we might get into Concord and Lexington. And that would probably take up the whole hour. I don't know if we can go further than that because if you talk about Concord and Lexington, you have to talk about the Minutemen, Paul Revere, and all of that. Also, the ramp up of hostilities within the greater Boston area. Right, MC?
Oh, yeah. We also have to talk about a couple other things along those lines as we go forward. There's a number of things that I'm kind of prepared to talk about several different things. All right, to go further if we need to. But let's get started. I'll go ahead and start reading off on Patrick Henry's speech here.
Yeah, Patrick Henry gave this speech on March 23rd, 1775 at St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia. This is the famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. But I don't know about you guys. In school, we never read the entire speech. So it's not that long. I figured we'll go through it, maybe read a paragraph, stop, and kind of dissect it a little bit.
Now I do want to point out something.
Stop being rude.
Go ahead.
All right, Patrick Henry, like a lot of people may already know, was from Virginia. Now, he was a lawyer. All right, he was very young. All right, for a lawyer, he was very brilliant, but actually, he had a problem initially speaking. He was very much initially a very poor public speaker because he was always one of these people who had anxiety about speaking in front of a large group of people. It's only when he started becoming a revolutionary that he found his footing. And in fact, the president of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken at this time that he's given this speech, and he starts into this oratory, is actually his father. So it becomes quite a coup as his father watches his son, who always had these problems, all of a sudden become this, grand orator. Trying to lower my fan, I apologize.
Oh, yeah, and kind of one of the major firebrands of the revolution. And he kind of fades into obscurity after the war.
To an extent. He is one of the principal founders initially against the Constitution as it's written because it doesn't contain the Bill of Rights. He wants a Bill of Rights in it. He's one of the pushers. He's one of the people who pushed for the Bill of Rights, although he's not really given credit for it, simply because most of that comes down to the Federalist Papers and the explanations and so forth. So,
yeah, have you actually read the Anti-Federalist Papers? Because they're just as important as the Federalist Papers. That was, it was an interesting argument back and forth that was going on.
Well, but in one sense, the Federalists were always right in that, okay, you have the ability to amend the Constitution. This was something that they had constantly had to repeatedly point out. Now, that they weren't totally right, let's be honest. We are in a situation now where our federal government is far too large as a result of not paying attention to things, but it is what it is.
All right, so let's attack this first paragraph here. Mr. President, no man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism as well as abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. But different men often see the same subject in different lights, and therefore I hope it will not be thought disrespectful to those gentlemen if, entertaining as I do, opinions of a character very opposite to theirs, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. This is no time for ceremony. The question before the House is one of of awful moment to this country. For my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery, and in proportion to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. It is only in this way that we can hope to arrive at truth and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and our country. Should I keep back my opinions at such a time through fear of giving offense, I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my country and of an act of disloyalty towards the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings.
No, right there. He's right there. He's placing a point. He's saying that he does not recognize the rule of the sovereign right, the rule by heaven, right? The divine right. He's saying that the divine right doesn't exist.
Yeah, the divine right of kings. He is pretty much giving it a bitch slap.
Yeah, he's saying that he is now looking at this saying, okay, there is no such thing as a divine right by kings, but at the same time he's saying he respects God's will. He's trying to set it up so that this is his view of the will of God versus the divine right rule, which, quite frankly, while it sounds revolutionary, people forget this had already been something within the English government. You've already had Cromwell, right? You've already had Cromwell's revolution where they killed the king. They executed the king, and the Parliament ruled for 20-something years, close to 30 years, right? Under Cromwell's rule, right? Was that divine right? So this in and of itself is not, revolutionary per se, because they'd already done it. I mean, the English had already done that back in the 1600s.
Yeah, they've already proven that you didn't have the divine right of kings. It just wasn't written into law, especially after the fall of parliamentary rule and the reinstitution of the crown.
Right. Well, the fact that they reinstituted the crown, I'm not sure. I've never understood why they did, except for the fact that they tried to create something that had some kind of executive power. But then again, the succeeding steps in Parliament, they slowly, whittle away all parliamentary power away from the kings anyway, away from the royals anyway. So I never did understand why they even brought back the king to begin with.
Yeah, too bad Farty seems to be indisposed, because I think he would have a different outlook.
Well, I'd like to know what their view was at that point. It would be kind of interesting to understand. Okay, you guys had Cromwell. Cromwell did away with the king. Why did you bring him back? I've never understood the if you've already created the ascendancy of Parliament over the king, which is what you did when you committed regicide. All right. Why then bring back the institution? Explain to me why you needed to do that. There has to be a reason why it was so important, because it did create stability within the nation to bring them back. I was just curious what the reasoning was, because when we do it, we're just as, I would say we're just as stable for the most part. We've had our incident over slavery. I mean, in the Civil War, but for the most part, we've been pretty stable.
Yeah, and all right, so this is a pretty short one. Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into peace. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of the number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not, the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. It sounds like he's pretty much saying he's willing to take the hazard, right? And he's calling his countrymen blind and deaf.
Well, he is calling them blind and deaf. He's also, once again, using biblical language. This is almost a direct quote from the Bible. He is also equivocating spiritual salvation, all right, with salvation on earth. That's what temporal means. Temporal power, all right, versus spiritual power. So he's talking about temporal salvation. Where's our salvation in the temporal world? We have to be willing to look for our salvation here as well as in our spiritual lives. So that's really what he's looking at. That's really where he's going with it.
All right, and this is a fairly long one here. Matter of fact, why am I reading the whole damn thing? I'm going to put in the private chat the link, and you tackle this long-ass paragraph, MC.
Okay, you'll have to rotate up as I go, right? I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging of the future but by the past. And judging by the past, I wish to know rather, what there has been in conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify those hopes with which gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves and the House. Is it the insidious smile with which our petition has been lately received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare to your feet. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed with a kiss. Ask yourselves, once again, another biblical reference. Ask yourselves how this gracious reception of our petition comports with these warlike preparations which cover our waters and darken our lands. Are fleets and armies necessary to work a work of love and reconciliation? Have we shown ourselves so unwilling to be reconciled that force must be called in to win back our love? Let us not deceive ourselves, sir. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. I ask, gentlemen, sir, what means this artful or martial display array? If its purpose be not to force us into submission, can gentlemen assign any other possible motive for it? Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for this accumulation of navies and armies? No, sir, she has none. They are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. They are sent over to blind and rivet upon us those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. And what have we to oppose them? Shall we try argument? Whoa, 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 whoa. Sir, we have been trying that for the last 10 years. Have we anything new to offer upon the subject? Nothing. We have held the subject up in every light of which it is capable, but it has been all in vain. Shall we resort to entreaty and humble supplication? What terms shall we find which have not already been exhausted? Let us not, I beseech you, sir, deceive ourselves. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm that is now coming. We have petitioned. We have remonstrated. We have supplicated. We have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and we have implored its imposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. And okay, I'm going to read that again. We have petitioned. We have remonstrated. We have supplicated. We have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and we have implored its imposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Our petitions have been slighted. Our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult. Our supplications have been disregarded, and we have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. In vain, after all these things, we may indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable, I can't pronounce that. All right, privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have so long engaged, and which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until glorious object of our contest has been attained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to God of hosts is all that is left to us. Okay, he is pointing out, he is very much pointing out, look, we didn't see the king. And I've said this before to people who don't understand this. The revolution began as an argument not against the crown. It began as an argument against Parliament. All right? It did not, our charters here as colonies came from the crown. They did not come from Parliament. And as a result, the loyalty owed that the American colonists felt that they owed was not to Parliament, but to the king. If the Parliament had engaged with us, had engaged with the American colonies in a different manner, had treated us as if we were no different than they were, we would not have gone down this path. And the fact that the king, all right, and Parliament were of the same mindset didn't help matters. Now, like I said, Parliament had assumed ascendancy. It had assumed control over the kings, over the royal assent. And this is one of the biggest things that people forget. The colonists owed loyalty to the king, not to Parliament. And the colonists, if the king had played this right, he could have reassumed authority, right, both over the colonies and over Parliament as a result, by simply saying, overruling Parliament and saying, no, the colonies will be judged by me. They owe loyalty to me, not to you. And he could have established a power base, all right, a power base of loyalists in the colonies at that time. Now, the likelihood is he would have might have been chased completely out of Buckingham Palace and sent back over to the colonies. All right, in chains. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, but the reality is our revolt initially was not against the king, and it's something that people have to understand.
Well, yeah, and what he's saying too when he talks about the Royal Navy and the Army coming to the Western Hemisphere, he's right. They're not here to face down the Spanish, okay? It's not going to be a violent overthrow of Florida, okay? They are here to put down Boston and any other colony who feels uppity.
Right, and of course, the colonists are doing things completely on their own. The colonists are used to the colonies have been self-sufficient. All right, there's nothing the colonies actually need, right, from the British Isles. And the British are doing things to try and prevent the colonies from becoming even more and more self-sufficient than they already are. For example, they tried to prevent looms from going over to the colonies. Weaving machines. They tried to prevent all of this technology from leaving Great Britain and going somewhere else to the colonies specifically, so the colonies didn't have to sit up there and get finished goods from the British Isles. If the colonies can have their own looms, if the colonists can make their own clothing, why do they need the British? Why do they need to sell things to and from the British?
Yeah, and this next paragraph reminds me a lot of current day. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be next week or next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed? And when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make a proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in such a country as that which we possess, are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations, who will rise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat it, sir. Let it come. Those are... Well, that's treason.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, but he's also making the point that you can argue it's saying, well, we want peace, all we want. The reality is it's too late for that. And this is something that few people understand with this kind of stuff. All right, when there comes a point where no matter what you do, it's too late to go back. You can wish in one hand all you want. You can hope, you can dream, you can say, let's get together, let's do this. It's too late. He's not just speaking to those who disagree with him, all right, about this being a disloyal act and everything. He's talking to the moderates, the people who are trying to play the game of let's try and find a middle ground. He's explaining to them at this point, middle groundness, there is no middle ground. You can wish for it, you can hope for it, but it doesn't exist anymore. Because those people that are looking for that middle ground, all you now are in the way. You're in the way of both sides. There's no place for you here. Okay, you can argue, you can make your decisions later on, but it's too late. Okay, the arguments are too late, and he's making the point that this is now going to be a break with the king. Okay, we remonstrated with all of those people. We started off trying to say, look, we're going to use her as the king because Parliament is being tyrannical against us, and we need relief. We appeal to you for relief, and the king has sent the army. The king has sent the navy. And there's other things that people are forgetting about. Now, well, why are they like this? Well, remember, the colonies are trying to expand westward, right? Well, who's stopping them from going westward? The English, the English crown. They have made other deals. They are trying to prevent the colonies from gaining power by continued expansion. So it's over. The middle ground, you can wish for it, and as you'll see, it's done.
And MC, since you suffered through that long ass paragraph, you get the final and best paragraph. Go for it.
It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. War is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to us our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the chains of slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And that's how he ended his speech.
And if what you said is correct, and his father was presiding over the house, that's pretty epic. I don't know what side his dad was on, but I hope it was the Patriot side. That'd be an awkward Thanksgiving.
When you see this man stand up, when you see these people are making it now, well, he's also doing something else. All right, that many people were arguing about, which is there were many in the southern colonies, especially and in Virginia especially, that looked upon the problem as being a northern problem, as being the problem of the Bostonians. Okay, but many, in fact, most Americans understood something. They had far more in common with those people in Boston than they did with the people across the waves, and the people across the Atlantic. All right, and he's making it clear that we are one people. Which this is an important dissection here, because he's creating a dichotomy that leads directly to civil war. Right? He's creating a dichotomy saying we're Virginians, but we're also Americans, and you will fight to the death to defend America. Well, you'll fight to the death to defend Virginia as well. Okay, but it's very similar into how the Greek city-states put themselves together. Right? We all speak one language. We all have more in common with each other than we do with the foreign invaders, such as the Persians, etc. Right?
Yeah, but what you said was very correct when it goes into when the war turns southward. You see it. It is a civil war in the South. There's no other way around it. People are fighting for their own reasons. It's not necessarily patriot and loyalist. It's really your great-grandfather stole 5 acres from my great-grandfather, and I've been wanting to kill you since I was born. I mean, they had their own shit going on.
They did, and that is a part of it. The southern plantation owners, all right, with the whole idea of indentured servitude and how that played out. There are people that believe that their family was cheated. They believe that family members have died at the hands of some of these people, some people, simply because they owed them something and threw them in the debtor's prison for a while. This is something else that's very important as well, right? Debtor's prisons were real things. Okay, if you owed money, they could put you in jail for owing money. Okay, this is something this was one of the biggest things in America that after the Revolution that they do away with. You cannot be placed in jail. You cannot be incarcerated because you failed to pay back a debt. It wasn't criminal in the sense that if you owed money, yeah, you still owed money, all right, bankruptcy had to be created and all these things, but they couldn't put you in jail anymore, all right, for owing somebody money. It didn't alleviate the debt necessarily, but it did prevent things like debtors' prisons and things like that, where somebody could say, okay, you signed this document, so therefore you didn't pay me back, so therefore on time, so therefore you're going to prison. And that was a major change. Right, all of this is in the works, and the reason for it is who's in debt, who's been taking out loans. Well, it's been the Americans trying to make their way, saying if you give me so much land, I'll produce so much goods. But if you have a drought or you have a bad crop, or something happens at the wrong time, or even things like all of a sudden there's a storm comes through. I'll be right back.
All right. And Sherardi, come on, you're not that sleepy. It's only 8 o'clock over there? And that was a good speech. I don't know how you're falling asleep during Patrick Henry. What's wrong with you?
But no, so all these things are coming to a head here, right? This is one of the reasons why you're seeing all this. In fact, some of these plantation owners are in debt, remember? Because, part of the reason they're in debt has to do with, the keeping up with the Joneses. I've got so much land, I'm considered a landowner here. I should be considered royalty, so I'm going to start, acting like I'm royal, right? Which is already another problem. It's already acting along those lines. You see what I'm saying? So it's Patrick Henry's fiery speech is what convinces the southern colonies, all right, which are where the plantations generally are, right, that they have one cause with the North.
Other than South Carolina drags its feet, which is odd considering South Carolina was the ones that started the Civil War, according to you, anyway. I still say Lincoln started it, but that's a whole different conversation.
Lincoln didn't sit up there and give us what we wanted, so we had to fire on them. I just had to go bang because he wouldn't listen to me. Anyway, that's a separate. We won't go down that road. We won't go down that. We're talking the Revolutionary.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you over the sound of the chains of slavery on you.
What you were not. You weren't listening to Chains of Slavery. You were listening to your own whining. But anyway.
All right. And then a month later, Paul Revere and I can't see his name.
Dawes and Preston Scott, and this of course is the big statue to Paul Revere. All right, Paul Revere's Ride, which is immortalized in a poem. Now, the thing about the poem, right, is it talks about it from Paul Revere. Now, Paul Revere was a revolutionary. He was one of the Sons of Liberty. All right, he was also a silversmith. Right, if you can produce a piece of flatware, all right, that has Paul Revere's name on it, you own something that's priceless, all right, for all intents and purposes. You own a piece of history. He was one of the people who had worked with John Hancock and Samuel Adams, all right, to oppose the British, all right, with force of arms. Okay, now the British were aware of this. All right, the British understood that the colonists were stashing or creating, weapons caches.
That's a lie, and you know it.
Yeah. The British were quite well aware that weapon caches were being created. All right. Now, before people, go berserk over this, they have to understand a few things. Right? First of all, really, what was being cached, all right, was powder. Okay. Now, black powder is something that you don't need, okay, a lot of technological machinery to produce. In fact, you could produce it in your own home if you know what you're doing, without doing much of anything. In fact, you don't need all the resources necessary to produce black powder are in abundance in America, right, for the most part, with the exception of small little ingredients like sulfur. Now, sulfur is not it helps things, but it's not it's not required for black powder to work. Right? There are other things that can be substituted instead of sulfur, which the colonists were well aware of. All right. So black powder was being produced in abundance in America. All right. Now, why was it being produced? Well, because it's used for everything. All right. Literally used for all over the place in all endeavors. And of course, it's also used in weaponry. Right? But people are using black powder to help them till soil, to actually help them remove tree stumps. Right? They're literally planting powder charges underneath tree stumps and blowing trees up. All right, this is or breaking stones that are too large so that they can create fields for farmland. All right, black powder is used for defense in a lot of different things. But the fact that they're starting to place these in strategic weapons locations begins to concern the British, especially the British in Boston, all right, because these weapon caches are going up and around in the area around Boston.
And if you're the British and you're looking at a map of the Boston area, we got a weapons cache here that we heard about. There's rumors of one in the county next to it, the county next to that. Wait a minute. This is popping up all over the place. How many men do the Sons of Liberty really have, and how many can they raise? Because even if these are a bunch of pussy-ass farm boys, if they outnumber us 50-1, they're going to beat us.
Well, there's that concern, and there's also the concern of they're forming militias, all right? And these militias are not necessarily, all right, pro-British, okay? So they're concerned about this. And so they march, a contingent of them march from Boston in an attempt to catch the weapons caches, and the ride of Paul Revere, all right, to warn the colonists in Lexington and Concord that the British are coming, all right, begins.
How long do you think they actually worked out the plan? 1 light if by sea, 2 if by land.
1 if by land, 2 if by sea.
Whatever. I was going to talk to my kids also. Give me a break.
Well, there was a number of different ways that they were concerned about how these people are going to come. How long did they have? Are you asking? What is? Ask your question again.
Do you think this was just a spur of the moment plan, or did they have it planned out for quite a while?
The British?
No, the Sons of Liberty.
No, the Sons of Liberty knew about it because what they were also worried about. You got to remember, there are certain people that the British, if they ever got their hands on, were going to execute. All right? If they ever physically got their hands on John Hancock, they would have hung him by the nearest tree. They wouldn't even worried about. They would not have even worried about, giving him a trial. All right? Sam Adams, same thing. All right? John Adams, same thing. These guys were people that were preaching revolt. Okay, they were preaching treason from the way the British looked at it, and if they had ever gotten their hands laid on them, they were going to be tried and summarily executed in a military court, and everybody knew it. All right, so they were always watching the British because they thought that at any point in time they could attempt to come out into the surrounding areas in an attempt to capture, all right, the quote unquote rebel leadership.
Well, yeah, because fairly early on, at least John Adams, I don't think the other Adams actually ever really left Boston, right? Samuel, I don't believe he ever left.
I don't think he did, but he was also used as a spy. because he was definitely involved in the Patriot cause. Okay.
Well, yeah, and John did, though. He closed up his practice after the Boston Massacre, and he moved out to the Adams family farm, which was, 15 miles from Boston?
Yeah. So what you see here is you see the ride here is by Paul Revere. This is the direction that he took. Okay. This right here is William Dawes, the ride that he took, all right, in an attempt to warn Hancock and Adams at Lexington, because that's where they were at the time, all right, that the British were coming, all right. Adams then sends Prescott further south, further west, all right, to try and roust up the Minutemen, because they had been preparing for this to stand against any kind of incursion, okay. And the Minutemen were people that had drilled and said, okay, you got to be ready to go in a minute. That's where the Minutemen came, at any minute. Now, whether or not you could prep to go in the morning or the night and then hop on your horse and be out I think there wasn't somebody with a stopwatch going, go. Oh, you're 5 seconds late, Charlie. Yeah, you got to work on that a little bit more. It wasn't anything like that. Okay, when they were talking about minute at that point, they were saying ready to go in a minute, in a minute, meaning quickly, all right? And you see the route that the British took, and they take it all the way here to Lexington. And on the Lexington Green, you have a series of the militia, all right, where they were going there to try and discover where these powder stores were at, failing to do so, by the way, right? Because when you get warned, well, then you remove all the all the contraband out of the area that was supposed to be there. All right, but the fact that they stood on Lexington Green begins the assault.
Yeah, and when the call came out, they had gathered in Lexington really far too early. A lot of them ended up going home, and then some went over to the tavern there in Lexington, and they were the ones that were there when the British actually approached in the early morning hours, just as the sun was coming up.
Right. And they form in the square. The British commander orders them to disperse. They refuse to do so. And then, of course, there's the shot heard around the world.
Which is, once again, another gunshot that we don't know who fired it.
Nope, we don't know who fired it. We do know that both sides suffered losses, but the majority of which on Lexington Green were Patriots. All right, they then bolt. All right, the British commander, thinking it's a good day's work, continues on, goes to Concord, where he's met again, and then decides, wait a minute here. There's a lot more here than what we had planned. When he goes to the bridge and sees that there's Patriots on the other side of the bridge holding it in force. They attempt, it's not really he attempts a crossing, and it's pushed back immediately because it's kind of like a half-hearted attempt. But what happens next is, as they begin retreat, there are a series of ambushes that take place. We show this as a road here, but what you don't realize is that this road is going through forested land. It's going through woodlands. It's going through farmlands. There are areas all over here, all right, where they can be ambushed. And they are ambushed all the way back to Lexington and then have to flee back to Boston, where Patriots are constantly shooting at them, constantly harassing them.
Yeah, there's some letters from some of the British that were there. They're like, It was like a hailstorm of bullets the whole way, and they just ran full speed all the way back to
Well,
Boston.
they had a problem. I wouldn't say that they ran, but they weren't in good order either. All right, it wasn't as orderly a retreat as you would have expected. All right, and because wherever they go, you got to continue. At some point, they even said when the firing started, they just kept telling their men, just keep marching, don't worry about the people who get shot, because they were so worried about being surrounded in these woods. And before somebody thinks that, well, that's not a big deal, they could have easily fought this. This is not as easy as you think it is, because they are in enemy territory and they feel like they're being surrounded, because every time they attempt to fly into the woods or even try and make a fight to go back, all of a sudden the militia isn't there. And it's a huge difference between trying to fire from a line where what's in front of you is just air versus people hiding behind trees. And then when you start marching into those trees, they just flee into the woods. There's no chance that you're ever going to catch them.
Yeah, and as they flee up the road, more are getting ready for you. I mean, it was.
It's exactly what's happening. And what are they doing? They're running away. That just slows you down. You start your march again, and there's another group waiting for you. All right, that's going to slow you down more. So it's a rolling gun battle all the way to Lexington. All right, and then for the most part, they do a very quick march back to Boston.
But that cemented the fact that there already wasn't going to be peace. I believe Patrick Henry was correct in his assumption during his speech. But if there was just, a hair of a chance of peace, it evaporated at Lexington and Concord.
It did. All right. And the next steps make it even worse for the British. All right. Because Ethan Allen, all right, along with a certain individual, all right, named Benedict Arnold, go to Fort Ticonderoga, and they at night, all right, in the wee mornings, attack them when they're sleeping and seize Fort Ticonderoga. All right, now, pretty much bloodless, very simple victory. All right, by the Patriots. You took a fort away from the British, right? But that's not the big problem. The big problem, it will be seen later, okay? But it is a huge, all right, loss. It's also something that people have to, which demonstrates that the revolt is not just Boston. It's not just the Massachusetts colony. Fort Ticonderoga was by elements from New York, okay, and from Vermont. All right, so other elements or other states, other colonies are getting involved in support of the revolution. All right. This kicks off the Continental Congress. All right, so they have a Congress, and the Second Continental Congress begins to meet. All right. And at the Congress, a certain individual shows up every day in uniform as they debate who's actually going to be in charge of the rebels. Right? Now, what has happened is in Boston, the British are looking out, and day after day, more and more little campfires are appearing out in the hinterlands. All right, they're feeling more as Minutemen and revolutionaries gather around. The British are feeling the pressure more and more and more.
Yeah, and this has always dumbfounded me. It's Howell, right? At the beginning and at the end.
Different Howell.
Oh, okay. But he doesn't lock down the city. He doesn't build fortifications, really. especially not to the extent where you have in later wars like DC,
Right.
Richmond. You know what I mean? And they could have dug fortifications like that. The Romans had fortifications like that.
They could have. However, the thing is especially how the Howe at this time, right? This General Howe, he does not want a revolution. All right, he doesn't want to kick it off. He does not consider the Patriots' grievances as being outlandish. All right, he does not. He represents the crown, sure, but he himself has more sympathies, all right, for the condition of the colonists, all right, than he does for the Parliament's decision for sending him over there in the first place. Okay, and he knows that this isn't going to be something that his troops don't want to do this. These are people that they know. You got to understand something. These are other in their minds. These are other Englishmen. These are people that speak the same language. In some cases, these are people that were friendly to them. Okay, they haven't. Overall, you got to remember, John Adams successfully defended the troops in the Boston Massacre. And from Howe's perspective, these people aren't really totally unreasonable. Now they can't be allowed to, to display arms against them, which he finds very distressing. But he doesn't want a war. He really does not want the war to happen. And of course, he fails. Now, at the Second Continental Congress, George Washington, like I said, who's been appearing every day in uniform, all right, basically, displaying his credentials, they finally say, you know what, we're going to appoint George Washington as the commander-in-chief. And if you read George Washington's acceptance speech, he's like, he basically says, oh, I didn't want this. You've given me a terrible task. I'll do it, but I really didn't want this. All right. Belying the fact that he was appearing every day in uniform. All right.
Yeah, he's a little full of shit.
Right. But I think that he also understands after the word of Lexington and Concord hit, right, and get to the Congress, that there's no going back. Okay, and so he immediately sets out, all right, for Boston. Okay, and this leads, before he can even get there, all right, Howe decides to do something about the encroaching forces of the Patriots. Okay. And you have what's known as the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Yeah, go ahead and dive into Bunker Hill. I'm going to go use the restroom. I'll just be a couple minutes. But this is a perfect time for you to just lay out Bunker Hill, and then we'll discuss it when I get back.
Now, as you can see here, what they're showing you is Bunker Hill, but in reality, the battle is fought here at Breeds Hill. Right, this is where the real battle begins. All right, the Patriots have been creating breastworks, all right, to threaten the British fleet, all right, and also the British across, all right, the British troops to where and in Boston, and they're creating a situation where they themselves now are beginning to lay siege to Boston. Okay, and there's concerns that if they're allowed to finish up these breastworks and really dig in, that they'll be impossible to kick out. Okay, the people in charge of the troops, of the militia groups, are Putnam and Prescott. Now, Prescott knows something. Prescott knows that they can't really fight this battle the way they would like to. All right, Prescott understands that he doesn't have the troops. He doesn't have the manpower. He doesn't have the mobility. Right, nor do his troops have the training or the skill set. Right, of Howe and the British regulars. He's also short of powder. He's short of ammunition, and he understands this. Okay. Howe deciding to make his move, all right, basically forces the hand. And as the troops land and begin to march, the initial line, as it's shown here, is they're going to try a quick demonstration here, but the main advance is going to be along this line, right? This is the first idea. This is an absolute disaster. But this is as the British form up their ranks, all right, and get close up ranks and everything. Prescott is telling his men, sit. Don't fire early. All right. Wait until the famous line, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. Howe marches up, hoping that they'll disperse. Instead, they're met with a hail of gunfire, which pushes back this main assault. At which point Howe knows, I can't take this and leave the high ground alone. They're not going to. I've got to take the high ground in order to roll up these flanks. So they reform and they attack the high ground the next time. This attack, all right, also is repulsed and thrown back. Okay. Howe reforms his line again, and attacks once more. But by now, ammunition is almost gone, and they're able to take the position. Now, these are fortified positions. But the British lose, for every one that the Patriots lose, the British lose 3. And they cannot afford a battle of attrition. Howe just does not have that many forces to absorb losses at that rate. And even though technically this is a British victory, okay, the colonists are able to claim they stood toe-to-toe with the British Army, all right, British regulars as they came up. And it creates the myth. And it is a Pyrrhic victory. Howe is very disturbed by this because the bloodshed is carnage in his mind. This is carnage that he doesn't want. This is carnage he does not want to pursue. Okay, he wants this. He's of the mind now to say, look, we don't want to continue this. All right. And before I get to the olive branch petition, okay, Washington arrives with his troops, but something else arrives. And that is the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga. And Washington begins to place the guns around Boston. And the British are looking out. Howe starts looking out, and he's shocked to see that there are cannons now beginning to appear around Boston. All right. Now I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because the cannons were brought in, all right, over the winter. The man who brought those in is a man who's going to become one of his advisors, one of his great advisors, and his chief artillerist, and that is a man named Knox. Fort Knox is named for this gentleman. All right, so these are going to have effects going on.
And when they were bringing the cannon over, we'll discuss that more when we get to it, but they had to go through mud, all sorts of crap, man, and they got the cannon there.
Didn't lose one. It's a great feat of logistics. Knox's greatest contribution to the war is the fact that he was a logistics master in many ways, which is something that's quite necessary, right, for how an army moves. Right, being in charge of logistics is quite important. All right, being in charge of artillery is important too. Don't get me wrong. Understanding how to move artillery and keeping artillery is quite important. So, one last time, the Continental Congress attempts to send the olive branch petition, right? And this is the olive branch petition right here, okay? I love the way they put this, right? Your Majesty's faithful subjects of the colonies of New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the counties of Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex, on Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, in behalf of ourselves and the inhabitants of these colonies, we who have deputed us to represent them in General Congress, entreat your Majesty's glorious attention to our humble petition. Note, once again, do you see Parliament anywhere in this? Do you see it anywhere? The union between our mother country and these colonies and the energy of mild and just government produced benefits so remarkably important and afforded such an assurance of their permanency and increase that the wonder and the envy of other nations were excited while they beheld the Great Britain rising to a power the most extraordinary the world has ever known. Her rivals, observing that there was no probability of this happy connection being broken by civil dissensions and apprehending its future effects, if left any longer undisturbed, resolved to prevent her receiving such continual and formidable accessions of wealth and strength by checking the growth of these settlements from which they were to be derived. All right, and you can read this whole thing, right, as it goes through. It goes on again and again and again. And it's an entreaty to His Majesty. At no point in this olive branch petition do they mention, will you see the word Parliament? And of course, it falls completely on deaf ears. All right, but once again, this was an attempt of Congress. This was an attempt of the colonies to try to get the king to understand that they themselves owe loyalty to the king, not to Parliament, and that they're willing to listen to the king, but they're not necessarily willing to listen to his minister that's told to the king from Parliament. All right, they're just not going to listen to it. They're just not going to accept it. All right, so the olive branch, it's presented, and basically the king, he doesn't. If I remember correctly, he doesn't say a word, and he just leaves it. He doesn't even really look at it.
Yeah, no, I don't think he ever read it. Yeah, I think he immediately just either sets it on his desk or throws it away. He never reads it. The die is already cast.
Right. And so you end up with the establishment. You've already had the establishment of the Army by the Continental Congress. You now have the establishment of the Navy, which, when you're playing little games with the other services, when you're in the Army, you basically look at the Army. We're the senior service. You guys in the Navy, you're our plebes. You were late to the party.
Yeah, and the American Navy has one really good story, and we'll cover that when we get to it.
Well, the American Navy is not, let's be honest what the American Navy actually is. The American Navy is a bunch of freaking privateers, all right?
Yeah, and there's one guy who they call the father of the Navy, and he actually bombards Plymouth, I think.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll talk about it. All right, as they build ships strictly for war. All right, up to this point, though, what you're seeing is harassment from privateers. All right, as the Americans sit up there and level letters of marque. Now, this is this is an old tradition, letters of marque. Okay, it's not something the British have been employing all that much anymore since they've spent money to create a true national, navies. All right.
Yeah, but
it's an old style way of doing things.
But technically, letters of marque are still around today. Governments can still issue them.
Yes, letters of marque can still be issued. But I'm just trying to point out that the British didn't do this simply from the fact that they didn't need to. All right. I do think that they allowed some letters of marque. All right. But for the most part, they didn't. They never issued letters of marque, mainly because the British Navy, all right, is sailing the world, and they have plenty of actual warships. Now, they have, not all warships are equal. They have some nice ships of the line, but for the most part, most of their navy isn't ships of the line. They're not the big frigates. Right? They're basically, cutters and things along those lines. Right? So they're not the large ships yet. All right, they will be coming though. All right, but they're not there, and the main reason is because most of the British Navy is engaged in other areas, and this is something that we as Americans we look at it as strictly a war with Britain. All right, but the British looked at especially the beginning of the uprising, as a minor uprising when they're dealing with the entire colonial set. And their biggest enemy, their biggest fear, all right, is the French king and the French power.
Yeah, and that's one thing we kind of skipped over in Patrick Henry's speech, because he mentions that we might be weak, but we need not stand alone. He was alluding to the French right there. And it's really interesting to me that these guys who were Englishmen in their own hearts and minds were so quick to go to the French.
Well, okay, but Patrick Henry wasn't like that. Okay, and this is something that people don't understand. That Patrick Henry considered himself an American. He didn't consider himself a British subject. Even early on, before the drums of war, before the final die had been cast in his mind, he had already convinced himself that he was something else. They were other. Now, the British looked at us as other as well. This is part of the problem. Is the British are not looking at us as anything but colonists. We're colonials. Even today, all right, you have the British that call us colonials. Now we look at that and go, okay, we ascribe it as, well, as we were part of the colonies, yeah, but we don't take it any further than that. It's just, okay, that just happened to be where we were. That's just a happenstance kind of a thing. But the view of a colonial to the British is also a demarcation of where you are within social status as well. And this is something we as Americans, especially this, so far removed from that time frame, we don't have a good feel for. They were looking at us as colonials as being part of the social set, and since we're colonials, you are a lower social order. You don't have the right to talk to your betters. You must listen to your betters.
Yeah, and that's where you and I kind of argued with Farty last week when he accused us of being Australia light.
in a certain manner, all right, but it's a different view of self-view, all right, and this is one of the reasons why people like Patrick Henry were like, no, we are not British subjects. We're Americans first, and we're being told that we're Americans first. Well, if we're American first and British second, well, then why shouldn't we act as Americans and let the British act as the British? Okay, we may serve the same king, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily British. You see the point. Okay, and this was an important demarcation. All right, and it's also why you see the petition being directed not to Parliament, even though Parliament is the government. Parliament is the power within Britain. We are not appealing to them. We are appealing to the king.
Yeah, do you think that's why Lord North took such a pro-war stance? He was the leader of Parliament, at least the War Department. And he, even at the end, when they got surrounded and surrendered, he wanted to reinforce the colonies again. They still had New York. He didn't want to give up yet. He got ousted.
Yeah, I think that he understood that what this was the colonists, all right, basically saying we can form our own second. The empire is now going to be fractured, all right, whereas the king becomes the overall head. And he understood something else, which is if it ever succeeded, all right, if the king had ever said, you know what, I myself am going to go across the ocean, all right, to talk to these colonists for rapprochement, right? This could have become a power base, all right, to serve as a counterbalance against the Parliament's encroachment on imperial will. It really could have changed. It could have created another element, all right, that would have created an interesting dynamic, because what it would have done is put the crown in ascendancy over Parliament, because the crown has other elements it could rely upon. And it could have created a model, all right, for the British monarchy that could have been copied by many other monarchs around the world. The fact that Parliament, however, all right, refused to do it, and that the king relied upon Parliament to create his ministers, all right, is why this never happened. It's a great what-if scenario.
Yeah, that would be interesting to actually do as a thought experiment sometime. Because as the American colonies expanded and went westward, he would have had a manufacturing base. He would have had the American economy under the crown only.
Sure, and it wouldn't initially have helped the crown, but over time, the fact that the crown had other resources to deal with certain recalcitrants, right? Specifically, the recalcitrants in Parliament. It could have been a great boon for imperial will. Now, it may have set up a situation like Rome, too, where Roman legions from these different areas came in and marched on Rome. I mean, that's a possibility as well.
Hey, burn London down once a generation. Why not?
It's one of those things. I mean, it could have been an interesting dynamic as it went through. Right now, at some point, like I said, it's great. It's a great thought experiment. All right, but
Goat Man in the chat. Not black powder. It's powder of color.
Okay, gunpowder. What's it called? Gunpowder. Avoid the whole thing.
Yeah, and the oil branch petition. Oil. I don't know why I said oil. Olive branch petition. It had a lot of pushback from people like John Adams and the more radical members of the Continental Congress.
Well, of course not, because let's suppose that it worked. Their great fear was that it was going to work. Their great fear was that the king would say, "Okay, I'll hear you. Let's talk more." That was their great fear. These guys are revolutionaries now. To them, all right, they want independence. All right, they want independence, and they're terrified of the king saying, "Okay, we'll give you independence from Parliament, but we won't give you independence from Britain." From the English crown. They were absolutely terrified of that.
Yeah, they were more willing to be hung than go back and kiss the fucking king's ring. You know what I mean?
They thought that they no longer needed crown assurance. Now, the colonists total, in all 13 colonies, you have about they even mentioned it, around 3 million men. Okay. That's 3 million men in 1776. The colonies, the size of the colonies was 3 million. By 1860, it's 30 million. It's a 10-fold increase. All right. It shows you what is going to happen going forward. Okay. And when you're talking about 3 million now, sure, London at this time is 500,000 to close to between 500,000 and close to 1 million alone. London is, all right. However, the colonies are growing at an ever expanding rate, and by leaps and bounds.
Well, yeah, we weren't constrained by being an island for one. I mean, and we didn't have France right across the channel as a counterbalance to our power.
There's also the fact that it's whether anybody wants to understand this or not, it's a healthier place to be. Life expectancy in the colonies is you're having a better quality of life and a better expectancy of living out of growing out of childhood into adulthood. Now, you may not it's still not great. I mean, because you're dealing with, the 1700s. But it's significant that the U.S. population is increasing dramatically. Now, a good portion of that increase is also the fact that they're still getting influx from around the world, right? People are landing in America from all over Europe, all right, to make their own way. You don't have people making their own way, doing that in Great Britain. You don't have people doing that. They're not expanding in that manner.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a good spot to end it with U.S. Navy being established, and we'll start next week in the tail end of November.
Okay.
And I do want to, because the Americans take Montreal, we don't really discuss that too often because we didn't hold it for very long.
Well, no, I mean, once some serious forces, once the British became serious and started seriously starting to try and take the colonies and prevent the colonies and put the rebellion down. Yeah, the idea of taking Montreal and these other areas just falls to the wayside.
Well, yeah, and then you have in December the Battle of Quebec. I kind of want to dive in next week and discuss a little bit about why the Eastern Canadian provinces didn't join the American cause, because that's another what if. Canada could be a part of the United States.
To be honest, that's more of a discussion for the treaties when they're talking about the treaties, the colonies, and everything. Because the reality is that the Montreal, Quebec, and those areas, they weren't British. Okay, at this time, for the most part, the people in those areas, they're not British.
That is true. It was native territory, but
native and sparse, and the other biggest thing was French.
But other than Sherardi, thank you everybody for coming out. Sherardi fell asleep not once, but it looks like, oh no, she started teaching math because we were boring her. I'm sorry you look like history. Sundays are the history day. Sorry about your bad luck. No. No, thank you as always for coming out. Please hit like. MC, well, there is no business trips, right? Pandemic. So
that's very true at the moment. There are no business trips scheduled at the moment. There's talk of one, but there's no business trip scheduled. So Monday morning, They'll be the my morning news and rants will be Monday morning.
Sure, Artie. Fuck you very much. Well, fuck you too. Now I cussed on the history stream. Thanks. Goddamn motherfuckers. No.
And as we derail this stream into chatting with the chatters.
Yeah, I missed my review of Lower Decks yesterday because Charter was stupid and I didn't have internet for like 4 hours or 3 hours. I don't know. Every minute seems like a day. So, I mean, it was forever. So I'm either going to try and do that tonight or I'm going to try and do that tomorrow. That way I could do, the next episode on next Saturday as usual. And then we're going to throw a Red Eye stream in there. Good night. Good luck. And check out MC tomorrow morning if you like to wake up, have a nice cup of coffee, and hear an old man scream at the sky.
Good night, everyone.